Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one we are taking a look at tonight's new Season Pass card, Elsa Bloodstone. Elsa is a 2-cost, 2-power card that reads, if you play another card to fill a location, give it +3 power. Now there was a little bit of confusion surrounding this card as the recent trailer that showed it off from Second Dinner had Elsa listed as an ongoing ability, but that was an error. She's actually not launching with an ongoing ability. This is just going to be another triggered ability, much like we've seen on cards like Kraven in the past. In terms of power, I think Elsa Bloodstone is one of the more powerful Season Pass cards we've gotten this year. +3 is nothing to scoff at, and a lot of decks can very effectively leverage the condition with things like Jeff or Mysterio, Nightcrawler, Kitty Pryde, to make it so she can give out that +3 multiple times throughout the game. We get 1 +3, she's a 2/5, which is already a pretty strong rate. But above that, we start to get into the 2/8 or 2/11 category, which, as we've seen recently with Loki and the Collector, is an insane amount of stats to get from a 2-drop. And Elsa has the added benefit of being able to spread out that power over multiple lanes, which is always very strong. I do want to quickly mention the Spotlight cash offerings as well, though Elsa is a Season Pass card and she's not going to be featured in the Spotlights this week because of that. I do like showing these just so people have an idea of what is in the caches for this week and if it's worth opening for. To me, this is a hard pass week. None of the cards featured here are very meta relevant at all right now. Best of the bunch probably being Thanos, who is still a bit hurt from the recent Soulstone nerf. X-23, where Destroy really hasn't had a ton of success recently, and Echo, well, Echo's Echo. So yeah, don't really think this is a week you should be opening for your Spotlights for, especially with some cool cards coming up later this month that are probably way more worth it. Before we dive into the Day 1 decks, do want to mention the article, which we'll have linked in the description below, from Safety Blade. He did a great job cooking up a ton of decks for Elsa, and I'm really excited to try some of these out when she launches later tonight. So if you want to read up a bit more on the decks, the logic behind them, or if you just want to grab a code to import them into the game, definitely check out the article, link in the description. Starting it off, we have Elsa and Jeff going to the zoo here. So traditional zoo style deck that has a bunch of payoffs for filling up the lanes here with things like Mojo and Dazzler. Squirrel Girl helps us go wide without actually having to have a whole ton of 1-drops in our deck, as does Mysterio. Rule of thumb for this one is you're always going to want to be playing Mysterio last most of the time, as that way you're going to help guarantee you're going to get as many of those Elsa buffs as possible. Important to remember that Elsa is a play trigger, so getting the Squirrel Girl Squirrel to fill a lane, if that happens, you're just not going to get the buff. You need the Squirrel to help fill the lane and then have whatever other card you played there be the card that actually gets the buff. This deck is running armor because even though Killmonger's not super popular at this very second, I would be very surprised if the abundance of 1-drop focused decks, particularly stuff around Kitty Pryde, that's going to come about in the wake of Elsa's release, means that Killmonger doesn't come shooting back into tech popularity. But basically, we're just trying to swarm out the board here. Nightcrawler, Jeff, and Mysterio are all really good ways of helping to get value out of that Elsa trigger. We want to get her down as soon as possible for that reason. Mojo and Dazzler give us more payoff for filling up the lanes, which this deck is effective at doing. Then usually we're just going to be curving out with Khazar and Blue Marvel and trying to vomit our hand on the final turn to get as many of those Elsa buffs as is possible. And Chavez is mainly here just for that consistency. This isn't a deck that's going to often want to play Chavez, though I'm sure there will be occasions where it is relevant. Generally, it's just here so that we can get those early cards, most notably Elsa, on curve when we need them. The next deck that's probably a no-brainer here is the Bounce deck. So Bounce was actually kind of an underrated deck before the recent Kitty Pryde nerf, and though that did take it down a little bit, Elsa seems like it can boost it right back up without too much issue. I think this deck was really strong. I played this deck quite a lot this month, and it took me to a Infinity Conquest win. So I'm a big fan of it, and I really like everything going on in this list. We're just using Kitty Pryde to pump up our Angela and our Bishop. We have the Mysterio Hitmonkey combo. We have Jeff. Basically, Bounce was already running all the cards that Elsa wants to run to take advantage of her effect, in Jeff, Mysterio, and Kitty being probably the best 3. So the fact that this deck was already doing the things we wanted to do for Elsa before Elsa even came out seems really good. And it also helps the fact that Kitty Pryde's nerf kind of gets a bit undone with Elsa Bloodstone. So given how strong this deck was previously, I think Elsa is a pretty surefire way of getting it back to that higher power level. Other card includes here Mobius to help make sure we don't get shut down by things like Wave, Beast is our main bounce tool, though you do have to be a little more careful about him in a world where Mobius exists. And Iron Man is an absolutely key piece that really helps us be able to contest decks that are putting out really high amounts of power, most notably Shuri. And another way you could experiment with the bounce shell is going a little bit more in on the bounce theme with the addition of Falcon, having Nightcrawler as another way to trigger Elsa. This is nice because it's a little bit cheaper. We can get it to 0 with Beast, Falcon bounces it. Just a lot of good overall synergy here, and trying to make the collector work in a deck that doesn't have Loki, well, definitely seems like a bit of a challenge. If any deck's going to be able to make it work, I think this one has a decent chance of making that happen. Next up, we have some Sarah decks. So this first one's a bit spicy. I saw Safety play in this one last month, pre-Elsa, and it seemed pretty interesting. So this leverages the new Blade buff alongside Dakin. So instead of trying to be a more reactive Sarah control deck, we're actually trying to be a bit more of a proactive one that's putting out a lot of power instead of trying to remove our opponent's power. This one makes the use of Luke Cage as a bit of protection, not only for bad locations, but because I think a lot of people are going to be breaking out the Shadow King to deal with Elsa and all the cards that are kind of benefiting from her. So unsurprising if that becomes a more popular tech card and Luke Cage shuts that right down. Dakin, pretty good in this one, ends up being a 3/8 a lot of the time, as we have two main ways of discarding his shard with Blade or Colleen. Blade is particularly nice because we can just go Dakin Blade on turn 4 and you're guaranteed to discard the Blade, or we can use Colleen towards the end of the game to do it as well if we have to play him on the final turn. Also, Colleen is just not a bad card to play on the final turn in the game, especially when Sarah's making her only a 1-cost card. And this deck can very effectively leverage the Mysterio Hitmonkey package, and this deck has proven to be very effective in leveraging the Hitmonkey Mysterio package as well as Kitty Angela shenanigans, and Elsa just seems to make that a whole lot better. Mobius for a bit of protection here against wave or other cost reduction shenanigans from the opponent, and Sarah so we can vomit out a bunch of cards on the final turn of the game. Sarah definitely a bit weaker in the wake of Mobius, might be worth considering some more tech there to help deal with it if you're seeing a lot of it. However, you're not often seeing this card every single game, so I think this is an interesting version of Sarah that's definitely worth experimenting with if you're looking to get some use out of your Dakin. And then we have the classic reactive Sarah deck. So the core here is still very similar. We're still using the Kitty Angela, Mysterio, Hitmonkey, Bishop packages here, Luke Cage for some protection. We're actually getting to run a Shadow King of our own, which we're a bit less afraid of since we have our own Luke Cage. It's going to be very interesting to see how effective Shadow King is here, but I think since Sarah Control has traditionally been a deck that's been very good at throwing priority, Shadow King will be very, very good against the Elsa decks. However, you will have to be a bit mindful of some of those decks that fight hard for priority in order to see out the game with Goliath, as those can be kind of challenging for this archetype. Though, with Shuri being a very popular portion of the meta right now, I think a deck that has a reactive strategy using things like Shang-Chi and Shadow King has a lot more potential than people are maybe realizing. Mobius acts as a bit of Loki insurance, as well as stopping Wave from shutting us down in its entirety. And other than that, it just plays like a Sarah control deck did before, where we have the option of going tall on the final turn with our Hitmonkey stuff, which Elsa makes better, or we just try and blow up whatever big things the opponents are doing with our Shadow King and Shang-Chi, while still often putting out a decent amount of power. Next up, we have some move stuff we can try out. Now, you might be noticing a theme here with Mysterio and Hitmonkey, and that's because, I mean, these cards were already really, really strong together, and Mysterio is just such a unique card in the way that it triggers play effects 3 times in 3 different lanes. So there's really nothing else like this card that you can use in order to get as many Elsa triggers as possible towards the end of the game, which is why we're seeing it in so many of the Theorycraft Day 1 decks here. This version does try and use the move package a bit though, so we have things like Nightcrawler and Jeff, who are already very strong with Angela and going to be good with Elsa here as well. Kraven, always been a good payoff for these cards. We have the new Spider-Man for a little bit of disruption with the opponent and payoff for our own move synergies. Mobius to help reduce what the opponent can do cost reduction wise, especially against opposing Lokis. Chavez for some more consistency of getting our early cards we need them, and Nebula just as another premium 1-drop. If traditional move is a bit more of your style than the newer Silk move decks, I think this is a pretty neat one, and actually as long as the other popular move decks stay around with the tempo move stuff, I think that a regular move deck might actually have a chance here, as they can really benefit from the fact that your opponent is moving stuff around the board a lot of the time. I ran into a deck fairly similar to this one earlier in Conquest, and was rather surprised at just how effective it was at shutting down some of the tempo move stuff that's been going around. But general idea with this one, just a lot of good move synergies. Elsa is pretty decent with move stuff, as we can fill a lane and then have the lane be moved. Elsa is pretty decent with move stuff, as we can fill up a lane and then use our move tools to actually unfill that lane while still getting the benefit from her. Multiple man, I think, is a particularly scary one here, as you can use multiple man to fill a lane and then you can move the multiple man and it will move that bigger copy. You'll get another copy of the big thing. It's actually, I think, a lot scarier than a lot of people are expecting right now. Also, not a whole ton of Killmonger around, so we can kind of get away with doing the Human Torch shenanigans. And we're trying some Spider-Man 2099 shenanigans while we're at it to remove an opposing threat. I do think he is one of the weaker links for this deck. However, there are certain situations, especially against some decks that don't play a whole ton of cards out, like Shuri, where he can definitely swing a game. However, if you don't have 2099, I think you might also be okay with a card like Shang-Chi in that spot as well. And then, of course, Heimdall, we're just really trying to move our stuff around the board with our things like Iron Fist, Doctor Strange, and Cloak to trigger our move effects, and then get one big push on the final turn with Heimdall to close out the game and kind of keep the opponent guessing in which lanes they have to be playing for. Sometimes one of the really nice benefits of Heimdall is the fact that you don't even have to use him, as your opponent will often expect a Heimdall with this move style of deck, so they'll go out of their way to play around it, and you can kind of go one level deeper by not playing the Heimdall and playing around them playing around it, which can be kind of fun. And we've been talking about Shuri quite a bit, so why not use Elsa to try and bring back Kitty Shuri? So Kitty Shuri was arguably the best Shuri deck for quite a while before the recent change to Kitty, and I think the hope here is that Elsa might just bring it back. So the idea is we're trying to pump up a really, really big Kitty. Elsa helps us be able to do that. We can double the Kitty with Shuri on turn 5, then slam down Kitty and copy it with Taskmaster on the final turn. We aren't all in on the Kitty plan though. We can still get a lot of power out by copying Vision and moving it around while copying with Taskmaster. And we just have the option of surprising people with Alioth as well, as most people generally won't see that coming from a Shuri deck. Though we are running armor here to tech against Shang-Chi and Killmonger, so you are going to want to be very mindful of where you play that armor if Alioth seems like a viable path to victory that game. Mobius here is mainly acting as some anti-Loki and anti-Wave insurance, which has become kind of his main role at this point. And other than that, the core here is pretty much the same as we were running previously with the Shuri deck. We just had to make a little bit more room for Elsa. And the curve generally being a bit lower with a lot of 2-drops should help us be able to guarantee that we're going to be able to use Kitty to fill a lane, to pump with the Elsa, and really get those big stats going. Another direction we can take here is with a Dracula Zoo style deck. This is a version of Zoo I've always really enjoyed. Basically, the idea is we're swarming the board quite a bit, and we're trying to flip one lane on its own, essentially, with Dracula discarding our Red Skull. Occasionally, it will discard Chavez, but Red Skull is the main thing we're aiming for here. By having a much lower curve, we are able to just hand dump our hand, so Dracula is not really a gamble. We should be guaranteed that we're going to be discarding one of our big things, and it's also nice as insurance against things like Shang-Chi or even Shadow King that aren't going to be able to mess with his power as it happens at the end of the game. Armor is a pretty important one here, as this is a deck that can be very vulnerable to tech, mainly Killmonger, but sometimes when we're actually forced to play out the Red Skull or the Chavez, the rare times that happens, it can be nice to have that bit of insurance from some more powerful tech cards, even though they're not the most popular thing at the very moment. And in addition to that, sometimes armor is especially helpful with locations that are otherwise really bad for us and can help steal a lane in that regard. Next up, we have a discard-focused deck. The idea with this one being we have the generally powerful things that discard normally does. However, Elsa gives us a bit of a payoff for our early swarms, as we can just get her down as a 2-drop, discard the swarm, be able to fill up our lanes more easily, and make it pretty guaranteed that Elsa should be at least a 2/8 worth of stats, which is nothing to scoff at. Ghost Rider gives us a bit of redundancy here if we discard something we don't actively want to, like our MODOK mainly, or our Stature, and Silver Samurai lets us attack the opponent's hand a bit while also enabling our own Stature at 1 cost. You do have to be a little mindful of Mobius in this deck, as he does shut down the swarm stature stuff, but if you're looking to go a discard route with Elsa, this could be an interesting one worth exploring. And last but not least, we have the Asgardian Monkey deck, so it's kind of like Bounceless Bounce. This is a deck that's been getting more popular recently. The idea with it being, we have Thor, which is just a decent 3-drop. 3/10s are pretty good, it turns out. And Jane has some really good synergy with the deck, not only with Thor, but it's going to draw our 0-cost cards in Wasp and Yellow Jacket, which are going to enable us to play a lot of cards on the final turn in order to make a very, very big hit monkey. Luke Cage, super important here, as this deck folds super duper hard to Shadow King, so we really do need to protect all the things we're buffing up, like Kitty Pryde, Angela, Bishop, Hit Monkey, and Thor. Just a lot of good stuff here that we want to protect with Luke Cage, and to get some added benefit from otherwise annoying locations. And then Mobius, another thing that really shuts this deck down is the wave on 5 stuff, so being able to help make sure that opponents can't reduce what we're able to play on the final turn with a wave definitely helps guarantee this deck can do the powerful things it's trying to accomplish. But that's going to wrap it up for our day 1 Elsa Bloodstone decks. Again, highly recommend checking out the article, link in the description if you want to grab one of the decks, and let me know in the comments, what are you thinking about this card? What are the things you're kind of excited to brew or test out with it? I'd love to hear it. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and stay tuned here at Marvel Snap Zone for all your Marvel Snap content. I'm Zombies, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.